That morning, the Walker twins were sitting on the mansion floor with red eyes, wrinkled dresses, and crooked tiaras. For the first time, they weren't screaming, laughing cruelly, or plotting a new trap. They were quiet, sad, and in barely audible whispers, they were asking for the nanny to come back. The housekeeper froze when she heard those words. In the past 8 months, 19 nannies had come and gone, each one humiliated, insulted, or driven out by the twins, who were known for their early and unpredictable cruelty. Some ran away in tears. Others quit before even finishing the first day. The rule was clear. No one lasted. Nicholas Walker, the reclusive and emotionally distant billionaire, showed no immediate reaction. But the surprise in his eyes said it all. Not even he, a man used to commanding tech empires, could make sense of what had just happened. Who was this woman? How had a simple nanny broken through a barrier that no one else had even managed to scratch? She wasn't famous. She wasn't specially trained. She didn't belong to that world of luxury. And yet, somehow, she had left such a deep mark that even the silence in the house felt different since she left. This is the story of the nanny who had nothing, and yet changed everything. But what exactly did she do? Is a secret you're about to discover. Grace Miller was the kind of person the world overlooks without even noticing. She didn't stand out anywhere, not for her tired face, her soft voice, or the way she walked with hunched shoulders as if carrying the weight of 1,000 lives. She was just another single mother trying to survive. But it hadn't always been that way. Grace had once been a preschool teacher, the kind who remembers every child's birthday, makes little notes with stars, and cries at the end of the school year. She was passionate about children, about the art of teaching, about a future built with crayons and sincere hugs. Until life decided to cut everything at the root. It all collapsed on a cold, early morning. Her son, Noah, only 3 years old, began struggling to breathe. Grace ran to the only health clinic that accepted Medicaid, desperate, with him in her arms. But when she got there, she heard the sentence that would change her life forever. "We're out of oxygen. You'll have to wait." Wait? Noah couldn't wait? And he didn't. He died right there, in her arms, in the arms of a woman who gave everything she had and lost what she loved most. From that day on, Grace ceased to exist. Only the shadow remained, the woman who survives but doesn't live, the one who looks at toys with tears in her eyes, the one who avoids walking past schools. And as if grief wasn't enough, the debts came next. Grace lost her job, her apartment, her health insurance. She started cleaning rich people's houses just to eat. Houses with marble staircases and crystal chandeliers. Houses where the children had everything Noah never did. Each time she scrubbed the cold floors of a mansion, she tasted the bitterness of injustice. A world where some people had private home theaters, and others, like her, couldn't even get an oxygen tank in an emergency. Until one rainy afternoon, life, always unpredictable, opened a new door. She had gone to deliver the resume of a friend who couldn't leave home because of a fever. The house? None other than the famous residence of Nicholas Walker, the tech billionaire, widower, and owner of half the apps used around the world. Grace didn't know who he was, and she didn't care. She was just doing a favor. She would drop off the envelope and leave. But fate had other plans. When she arrived at the massive gate, A distracted security guard looked at her, at the rain, at the soaked envelope in her hand, and made a snap decision. "Ah, you must be the emergency backup. Mr. Walker's desperate for someone. You can go in." Grace tried to explain, but he had already opened the gate. And seconds later, she was inside the most extravagant house she had ever seen. It was like stepping into another world. Persian rugs, glass walls, staircases straight out of a movie. A place that glittered on the outside and hid dark secrets on the inside. Before she could say a word, a woman in a suit appeared and said, "The girls are upstairs. Good luck." Girls? What girls? Grace had no idea what was going on. She climbed slowly, with soaked shoes and a pounding heart. She was greeted by two sweet smiles, and seconds later, two tiny hands smearing red lipstick on her shirt. "She hit us!" the twins screamed. Grace froze. The floor felt like it was spinning. She knew it was a trap, just one more for the statistics. The girls laughed. They expected shouting, swearing, revenge. But what came next was a shock. She didn't scream. She didn't defend herself. She sat on the floor, tears streaming silently down her face. And in the silence of that moment, something happened. She looked at those two girls and saw beyond the anger. She saw the deep pain hidden behind their bright eyes, the emptiness that couldn't be filled with toys or tantrums. And in a trembling voice, Grace spoke softly, almost to herself, but with enough intention for them to hear. "I know what you're feeling. This pain, it's what makes you act this way. It's not because you're bad. It's because you lost someone you loved deeply. I lost my son too. And I know what it's like to grow up missing someone who's never coming back." She took a deep breath and continued. "And I also know that your father, he's so busy with work, he doesn't even see what's happening here. But I can see your pain, even if no one else can. And I'm not going to run away. I'm not going to yell. I'm going to stay, even if you try to push me away." The girls, stunned, paused for a moment. The shock was clear in their eyes. No one had ever spoken to them like that. It was the first time they heard a voice that didn't want to punish them, but understand them. That didn't see them as a problem, but a cry for help. Grace had no experience with mansions, staff rules, or billionaire etiquette, but she had something no nanny before her possessed, a heart that knew loss, that felt absence, that understood silence. And in that moment, something shattered, an invisible wall that neither money nor education could break. Because deep down, those twins were just two little girls desperate to be seen, loved, and understood. And Grace, she who once was invisible to the world, finally saw and was seen. Charlotte and Claire Walker, 6 years old, identical twins. In their features, sharp intelligence, and cruelty masked by angelic smiles. In the quiet circles of New York's high society, they were known as adorable until someone accepted the job of taking care of them. The truth was very different. 19 nannies had passed through the Walker mansion. 19 cried. 19 gave up. One was pushed into the garden fountain while holding her phone. Another was locked in the basement all night. A third woke up with half her hair cut off. All of them left wearing the same expression, a mix of trauma, helplessness, and pure terror. It was as if the girls had a radar for emotional weakness and attacked exactly where it hurt the most. But no one stopped to ask why. The simplest explanation was they were spoiled, too rich, too dangerous. But Grace saw something else from the very beginning. The twins weren't just mischievous, they were broken. Perfect reflections of a home that looked luxurious on the outside, but was hollow on the inside. And the main cause of that emptiness were tailored suits and signed multi-million-dollar contracts on the 57th floor of a skyscraper. Nicholas Walker. The tech billionaire had lost his wife 2 years earlier in a tragic helicopter accident. Since then, he did what he knew best: control, calculate, bury emotions with spreadsheets and meetings. To the world, he was a genius. To journalists, an icon. To shareholders, a constantly growing empire. But to his daughters, he was just a ghost. A man who never looked them in the eyes. Who cared about their grades, their clothes, their school performances, but never asked, "Are you okay?" Their mother's death left a hole, and Nicholas, trying to fill it with toys, nannies, and Mandarin lessons, only made it bigger. This was the environment Grace fell into, by accident, unprepared, unaware of what to do with so much wealth and so much pain scattered throughout golden rooms. But there was something in her that the twins couldn't ignore. They tried. Oh, how they tried. They poured sauce in her hair, pretended they were being mistreated, hid her phone, wrote "idiot" on her uniform with a marker. But Grace never yelled, never lost control. On the contrary. "I know why you do this," she said one afternoon, with the calm of someone who's known rock bottom. Charlotte crossed her arms, defiant. Claire rolled her eyes. "I know why you do this. Because if you can make someone give up, it proves to yourselves that no one ever stays. Because when you lose someone you love, like your mom, you start to believe no one else will stay either." The silence that followed was almost sacred. Grace wasn't there to win a battle. She was there to stay, even while bleeding on the inside. Every day, she did small things, left sweet notes in the pockets of the girls' coats, drew stars on their breakfast pancakes, sang old songs in the hallway, even when she didn't know if anyone was listening. And it was while singing one of those songs that everything changed. Grace was softly humming a lullaby when she used to sing to her son Noah. It was almost automatic. The melody floated like a whisper through the cold mansion walls. Suddenly, Claire appeared in the hallway. She stopped, trembling, eyes filled with tears, mouth slightly open. That song. It's the one Mommy used to sing to us," she whispered, her voice cracking. Grace stood still. The pain in her chest felt like a punch. "I know. She knew how to comfort you. And you miss that so much you don't even know how to ask for a hug anymore. You only know how to hurt." Claire broke down. She cried like a lost child. Charlotte came soon after, and for the first time, both girls clung to Grace's arms. No screaming, no provocations,
no masks. From that moment on, the girls began to change. Not overnight, but in the details. They left notes for Grace on her door, drew portraits of the sad lady who smiled with her eyes, started helping in the kitchen, asking questions about the son Grace had lost. What was Noah like? Do you think he would have liked us? Innocent questions, painful, honest. They didn't know it, but they were healing Grace just as she was healing them. In that palace of glass and secrets, among silent rooms and expensive toys, 3 broken hearts were slowly being stitched back together. But the world of billionaires does not accept change without resistance. And the fact that 2 once uncontrollable children were becoming softer and more human caught the attention of those who preferred to maintain the status quo. Grace was stirring what wasn't meant to be touched. And that would soon have consequences.
Grace Miller had never been trained to deal with billionaires, nor to care for girls raised in a world of gold and absence. She didn't know the rules of the Walker Mansion, couldn't speak with the robotic elegance of the other staff, and didn't master the polished silence of the elite. But she knew something no one else there did. She knew grief, absence, the hollow wound death leaves in the chest, one that money can't fill. Over time, without effort, without a plan, without a mask, Grace began to enter the twins' world, not through obedience or control, but through the heart. She talked to them about stars, about how sometimes longing hits the stomach so hard it feels like hunger. She told stories about her son Noah, not as a tragedy, but as a living memory. She drew hearts on the mirrors with lipstick, writing messages like, "You are more than a rich girl. You are a beautiful soul, and you deserve to be loved." The twins, used to manipulating the world around them, were confused at first, then enchanted, then dependent on that human warmth they hadn't felt since their mother had passed. Grace had no idea of the impact she was making, but the truth is, she was creating cracks in the emotional walls of that house. And one of those walls was Nicholas Walker himself. The billionaire moved through the mansion like a cold wind, without looking, without listening, without feeling. The man who had once deeply loved his wife now hid behind contracts and encryption. To him, feelings were a risk that couldn't be quantified. Grace watched him from a distance. He was everything she wasn't: powerful, influential, full of resources, but also everything she knew all too well: empty. On the outside, he seemed untouchable, but inside, he was a man suffocating from something he didn't even have the courage to name: guilt. One day, after another quiet afternoon with Grace and the girls, Nicholas finally noticed something. He entered his daughter's room, something he hadn't done in months, and saw the drawings on the walls. There were portraits of their mother, of Grace, of little Noah. And beneath one of them, it read, "Family of the Heart." Nicholas froze. His stomach twisted. It was as if someone had invaded the emotional space he'd buried years ago. That night, he came downstairs and watched Grace reading to the twins. She was wearing an old sweatshirt. Her hair was tied up in a messy bun. No makeup, no princess posture. But there was a light in her eyes, a calm Nicholas had forgotten even existed. And then something happened. After putting the girls to bed, Grace went down to the kitchen.
She needed some tea or anything warm to help her digest a day filled with unspoken emotions. When she walked in, she found Nicholas standing by the window, his gaze lost in the darkness of the garden. He seemed motionless, but something was pulsing beneath his rigid posture, as if he were trying to contain an inner earthquake. Grace hesitated. She was about to slip away quietly when she heard his voice, low and choked. "I was supposed to be on that helicopter." She stopped. Didn't understand at first, but then he turned slowly, and his eyes were red. "I was the one with a meeting with investors out of town, but at the last minute, something went wrong here at the company. I asked her to go instead, just to sign the papers. She hesitated, said she didn't want to go alone, but I insisted." Grace felt her heart tighten. "I promised it would be quick, said I'd be waiting for wine for dinner. She got on, against her will, and never came back." For a moment, the silence was so heavy it felt like the air in the kitchen had disappeared. Nicholas took a deep breath, but his voice cracked as he finished. "Since that day, I haven't been able to look at the girls without seeing her face. So I ran. I locked everything inside me. I even locked them out." Grace didn't say anything right away. She simply stepped closer. Not to comfort, but to be there, present. With teary eyes, she whispered, "You didn't know she was going to die, Nicholas. You just made the mistake every rushed human makes. The mistake of thinking life can wait." And for the first time in a long time, the billionaire everyone feared cried. As the ice began to melt between them, a cold and calculating presence was preparing to intervene. Madeline Walker, Nicholas's sister, the twins' godmother, and the true guardian of the family's reputation. She was what you might call the matriarch of the empire, wealthy, elegant, ruthless. And as soon as she realized those girls were becoming attached to a poor stranger with a tragic past, she took action. She ordered an investigation into Grace, dug into every detail, uncovered the death of her son, the therapy sessions, the low-paying jobs, the nights spent in shelters, and turned it all into ammunition. The next morning, without warning, Madeline appeared at the house, with a dossier in hand and contempt in her eyes. "You're letting an unstable woman fill your daughter's heads with stories of suffering? She has trauma, she's unstable, she has secrets." Nicholas hesitated, but the weight of guilt and doubt made him give in. Grace was called into the room. There was no conversation, no warning. "Pack your things. Your job is over," Madeline said. The twins screamed. Claire clung to Grace's shirt. Charlotte kicked the chair. But it was no use. The door closed. Grace was erased from the mansion as if she had never existed. And just when she was beginning to heal, she was thrown back into the darkness. But what no one knew was that for the first time, it wasn't just her who was shattered. Now the twins also knew what it was like to lose someone they loved. And that would change everything.
Grace's departure didn't just leave an empty space in the Walker mansion. It left a silence that screamed. In the first few days, the twins withdrew. The laughter disappeared. The little notes stopped appearing, and the requests to play were replaced by a painful muteness. Charlotte and Claire, who once did everything to drive every caretaker away, now looked like living statues of longing. If before they were called the twins from hell, now they were just two little girls with no ground beneath their feet. Nicholas noticed. Even though he tried to maintain the unshakable routine of a billionaire CEO, the details betrayed him. The rooms were too quiet, the meals untouched, the absence of that silent and steady presence that somehow had rebuilt their home. One night, after yet another dinner without a single word, Nicholas went up to his office. He needed to finish a presentation, but ended up re-watching old videos of his daughters. Among the recordings, one appeared that he didn't remember saving. Charlotte and Claire jumping on the bed while Grace read a book and smiled. She didn't know she was being filmed. It was a genuine smile. That was enough to make Nicholas fall apart. That image pierced through all his defenses, and right there, kneeling on the office carpet, he began to cry. The muffled sound of his sobs echoed through the mansion, and Madeline, who was still staying in the guest room, heard it. When she entered the room, she found her brother on his knees, the tablet on the floor, eyes filled with tears. It was a Nicholas she had never seen before. Broken, no armor, none of the coldness of a man who commands empires. She approached him cautiously. "Nicholas, what's happening?" He took a while to answer, but when he did, his voice carried the weight he had borne alone for 2 years. "The trip was supposed to be mine. I had a meeting with investors out of town. At the last minute, a crisis came up at the company, something urgent. I asked Emma to go in my place, just to sign a few papers." Madeline remained silent. He went on. "She didn't want to, said she hated flying alone. She hesitated, insisted we could reschedule, but I didn't want to delay the deal. I insisted." His words began to falter. "I promised it would be quick, that when she got back, we'd have dinner together. She went, against her will, and she never came back." Madeline was in shock. She knew her brother's pain, but never with that detail. Nicholas buried his face in his hands. The quiet sobs escaping him weren't from a billionaire. They came from a widower who had never been able to forgive himself. That's why he buried himself in work, why he avoided looking his daughters in the eye, why he kept hiring, firing, automating everything, as if he could control every part of life except the guilt. And that's what made Grace so different. She wasn't just someone who took care of the girls. She was someone who saw beyond the masks. She had felt the absence. She knew the kind of pain that can't be cured by painkillers or luxury therapy. And because of that, she was the only one who saw Nicholas for who he really was inside. A shattered man pretending to be in control. Nicholas looked up, his face still wet. "She wasn't a threat, Madeline. She was the first person since Emma who managed to reach me." His sister said nothing. For the first time, she had no arguments. That night, Nicholas didn't sleep. He wandered around the house as if searching for traces of Grace among the furniture. The next morning, something had changed in him. Without telling anyone, he went down to the garage, took an old car, simple, no special plates, and drove alone to Brooklyn. He didn't bring security, didn't use a driver. He knew where she lived. Grace had left an old address in her hiring paperwork. It was a poor neighborhood where the buildings held more stories than paint. Nicholas parked in front of a community laundromat. He watched for a few minutes, trying to gather the courage to get out. He looked down at the passenger seat, where he had placed a white envelope with her name written by hand. There was no prepared speech, no empty promises, just a genuine desire to ask for forgiveness. Across the street, he saw Grace, sitting on a step, holding a bag of used shoes. She didn't notice who was watching her. Even with a shattered soul, she still carried that look, the same one that had once brought his daughters back to life. He got out. No rush, no shield. Stopped in front of her, and for the first time, he knelt, not as a billionaire, but as a father, as a man. With trembling hands, he extended the envelope and said, his voice breaking, "I didn't see what really mattered, but now I do. Please, come back." Grace looked at him for a few seconds that felt eternal. Her face was calm, but her eyes were filled with tears, as if she had always known this moment would come. She didn't reply. She just took the envelope gently and smiled, not with her lips, but with her eyes.
Months had passed since that quiet morning in Brooklyn, and much had changed from the inside out. Grace didn't return as an employee. She came back as someone invited to be part of the family. But she accepted on one condition. The twins had to learn how to live in the real world too. Nicholas didn't just agree, he embraced the idea. Charlotte and Claire began attending a regular school where they stood in line, shared their snacks, and learned to hear the word no. In the first week, they cried, complained, even tried to run away. But little by little, they blossomed. Because someone gave them what no one else had dared to, boundaries with affection. They didn't lose their spark, but they stopped using pain as a shield. Grace, in turn, seemed to have found her place in the world again. And that place wasn't a job. It was a home. The mansion was no longer cold. Music returned to the hallways, and the smell of cake baking became common in the late afternoons. Nicholas changed too. He started having lunch at home. He made a habit of reading bedtime stories to the girls, even if he sometimes forgot the ending from yawning so much. And most importantly, he stopped running from his pain. There were no labels between him and Grace, no candlelit dinners or grand declarations, but there was something even more rare: respect, affection, and true partnership. One night, after putting the twins to bed, the two sat in the garden, gazing at the starry sky. "You know," Nicholas said, "it took me months to be able to look into my daughter's eyes without feeling guilty." Grace answered gently, "Guilt teaches us, but it can't be the house we live in." He looked at her as if he wanted to lock that sentence in a vault. She continued, "They don't want a perfect father. They just want a present one. That alone changes everything." Nicholas nodded. For the first time in years, he felt light, as if the weight of 2 years of silence had finally been laid down. From the room upstairs, a child's laugh echoed. Claire said something in the dark, and Charlotte answered with a poorly disguised shh. Grace smiled. Nicholas did too. In that moment, what once had been a giant, empty house had finally become a home full of soul. And that's how a simple woman, marked by her own pain, broke through the walls of a millionaire family, and piece by piece rebuilt what money could never buy: belonging, healing, and true love. If you also believe that love, empathy, and new beginnings are worth more than any fortune, then this channel is for you. Here, every story has a soul, and every ending can be a new beginning. Subscribe and come be part of this community that believes in the power of transformation. See you in the next story.